Hmm.
Okay, this is the opening slide, the individual project. The introduction, just this paper will highlight my journey on becoming a servant leader and my plan for growth as a servant leader. It also, well, it will also examine how events and people, heritage and hand of God times have shaped me as a servant leader. The impact of my natural gift on my growth as a servant leader will also be discussed. Then the gaps or challenges that may affect my leadership growth plans will also be emphasized. Then my journey as a servant leader, I just listed them as I remembered them. I'm the firstborn in the family at primary school in classes. I was class captain, like somebody that helps the teacher get things done. Then primary school, I was a prefect at the final year. Then I assisted teachers at secondary school at various classes in some subjects. Then I held some positions while I was at the university in Nigeria, Fellowship of Evangelical Students. Then I was the Bible study secretary at the Nigerian Corpus, Christian Corpus Fellowship. That's after the university in Nigeria, we have 1 year of national service, like a paramilitary some sort. So we had a Christian fellowship, so I was the Bible study secretary. Then after that, I worked at a secondary school, Effective International. I was a vice principal before I left. Then I joined Mount Carmel Christian School. I was the school administrator before I left. Then I joined my church I was attending in Nigeria, Kingdom Citizens Pavilion with Dr. Reju. I was the ministry administrator. And then I'm also doing a project management training here, and then I found myself being the project manager, and I have some business analysts and project managers, or I mean officer. So I'm leading that group now. So that's why I'm at the moment. And then events and people who have shaped my servant leadership journey. Being the firstborn in the family, I get to they look up to me, and then I make some decisions or validate some decisions that we need to make as a family. And then my parents also molded them from the time of my awareness. I've always known my father to hold some executive position in the professional association and in church groups as well when we're attending church with them. And then my mother too, of blessed memory. And then their leadership activities actually gave me the idea that, okay, you can actually lead a group and then, serve the people, put people first. That's what I saw my father, do, with the groups he has been leading or he has led. And then my pastors have also shown me an example of how to model leading people. The impact of my natural abilities on my growth as a servant leader, I think my position in the family, I get to let them have their opinion or, get the privileges before maybe taking my own portion, so to speak. I also feel I am able to offer some sort of encouragement. So anytime I read the story of Barnabas in the book of Acts again, I kind of see myself in that mode. And I've functioned in, administrative positions for some time. And I think I have the gift of administration. Then listening, I'm able to listen and, take in what people are saying, most times without interrupting them. And I also think I have the capacity for a certain level of empathy. Which sometimes, when looking at what's it called now, hindrance, I think sometimes I'm empathic too much, so to speak. Plans for growth. I will always embrace the principle of conducting felt and actual need assessment, as explained by Woods. That's Christian Wood in that Servant First. It's one of the authors in Servant First. So she talked about felt and actual need, especially it relates to educators. And there's something that Gibbs also talked about that in as armed principle for coaching. And then storytelling is one of the things that Gibson in that article also said. And I've seen that storytelling engages, it makes people want to listen, especially, as a teacher. I see that when you tell students, I'm going to tell you a story before we start this class as regards this topic, there's no way they will always want to listen. Then I will inculcate the communication skill as depicted in SIPE and Freak, ABC and XYZ. Like they said, okay, because of, I see that because of ABC and XYZ is why this is happening. I found that principle very, very insightful. Then celebration is one of the things they talk about. There is also the peace rule. It's more or less like an acronym, which I will expand all this right when I finish writing. Then the implementation part. In that book, I find it very, very, very instructive as well. For each of the competencies, I will work with it conscientiously from time to time. One of the quotes that Greenleaf said is, "Able servant with potential to lead will lead, and where appropriate, they will follow only servant leaders." So this is a statement that formed the basis of my ability to develop myself from within to serve, and also have the capacity to recognize and follow genuine servant leaders. I will also commit myself to instill in the young people around me, especially my students in church, wherever I find myself, that servant leadership tendency. Then the personal inventory exercise that we did is something I want to go back to periodically to assess growing. Then these are the gaps and challenges that I've identified. I don't know if I've exceeded my time. The first factor I identify is the cultural factor. And like I think I've mentioned it in the class before, Africans, leaders are not servants. Leaders are bosses, leaders are rulers. Leaders are, they are in charge. So that's one of the things that I have to consciously get out of while leading a group. And then sometimes I want to get things done quickly. I have to make sure I'm patient to see people fail through things that they need to do rather than grabbing it and then doing it. And then I've also read in the books, despite the fact I feel that I can listen, I need to listen to myself while listening to people as well before I just have the urge to cut in. And then I need to be objective and to be empathic objectively, so that I don't indulge in people's inaccuracies and disorderliness. And like one of the speakers in the videos that we listened to, can't remember her name now, but the lady with Southwest said, they asked us question, do you fire people? He said, we have to fire in love so that the organization and the person grow. That I have not been able to, do accurately. So I think that's about it.
Okay, thank you, Sigon. I'm going to let your colleagues make any comment or ask questions about your presentation.
I'll ask a question. Can you elaborate a little bit on what it meant to be firstborn for you?
For me, right from childhood, I've seen that when my parents drummed them into me, that I must show example to my younger ones. So I carry that most times on my shoulder, that, okay, if I do something, I don't have the moral right to demand otherwise, from them. So that's one of the reasons that's one of the reflection I had while thinking about my journey as a leader, because my parents expect so much from me, and for me to really show example, I must for me to really demand accuracy from my younger ones, I must show them example, serve them. Um, uh, there's a certain level of sacrifices that I have I've had to make rather, to make sure that they get on. There are certain times that I tell my parents, okay, maybe resources are not enough, let them get it, and I can manage. So and then now that we are all grown, when we're making decisions, I try to make sure that I give them the opportunity to hear their opinion rather than giving them directives.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can you go back to your gaps page?
Okay.
So you talk about the cultural factors. Would you be willing just to talk about that a little bit more as far as just ideas you have for kind of what that's going to look like for you?
Like I mentioned earlier, for us, it doesn't come natural. The system, the natural system of leadership is that of, the kingship. A king doesn't listen to anybody. A king tells everybody what to do. So that kind of tendency also gets into even corporate organization, where the CEO says what he wants to get done, and it has to be done. So and everybody, the moment you are at the end of affair, I mean, everybody has to listen to you. The only way people can get their thoughts or is by being sycophant. So that's the cultural factor I'm actually referring to there.
Okay.
Does that make
Wonderful.
sense?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm glad you reflected on that in terms of your own the challenge that it presents to you as you seek to consciously serve and be a servant leader in a culture that is not naturally encouraging of servant leaders. I would like to say that the African culture is not the only culture that is not, quote unquote, naturally inclined towards encouraging servant leadership. It is a challenge across cultures. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask Brian, because I'm conscious that he just has a short lunch break. I'll ask him to present next. Brian? Is he there? Okay. Let me just send him. I know. Oh, he has a 1:30 meeting. So he will send his presentation for us to view. Okay. I'll accept that. Okay. Andrew, could you go next, please?
Sure. All right. So, yeah, as my outline, my journey into servant leadership. I can move this around. I didn't see myself as a leader when I was young. A few different factors. I was the youngest of three. I didn't see myself as popular in school. But this also led me to kind of blazing my own trail in life. And I think others would always kind of describe me as eccentric and in that way, just within my interests. I had a brother and sister who were 6 and 7 years older than me, and me blazing my own trail looked like me not necessarily following in all their footsteps of everything they did. So my brother was an athlete, my sister was an amazing dancer, but this led me into trying kind of out my own things. But I think this also gave me a appreciation for people who are different, for challenging status quos. And I think that also helped me to, long-term value people with differences. And so early on, I didn't see this as something helping me, but now looking back, that's kind of what I see. So, this is just a list of people who have modeled servant leadership in my life. It's different people along the way who invested in my life. Tony, the first guy, was a leader in my youth group, and I often felt like kind of the odd one out in my youth group, and he really invested in me and served me well, would pursue me. And so that was a great model of it. Ranji Thomas was a young life leader who, again, really pursued me. And I also got to see inside of business. He started Nextel Wireless, Vario, and then also a children's education company called Flying Rhinoceros. So from an early age, was an entrepreneur, that had been very successful, but was also investing in my life. And I saw that as, he was a self-made millionaire by the time he was, I believe, 20. And here's a guy who chose to invest in me by spending time with me and pursuing me and mentoring me. Larry Hubaka was also a local Young Life leader. He asked me to help lead a Young Life middle school group with him, and just gave me a lot of opportunities to try things. And looking back, I go, okay, here's someone who empowered me to learn. Rick Daniels was a professor at the college I went to, and so he was the staff member of record for our Campus Crusade group, and he met with me faithfully for 4 years, loved me faithfully, let me be where I was at in my journey while walking with me, helping me grow. It came down to my level. Jeff Taylor, a worship leader who did the same thing, mentored me, pursued me, walked with me in my journey, and didn't expect me to be where he was, but came down to my level and walked with me. Dave Miller, another pastor who did that, and still is a mentor of mine. And then Dr. Kurt Risley, he's the owner of the company I work for, and he also pastors the church that I'm part of. And he has just had an amazing impact on my life over the last 5 years, modeling servant leadership. He's actually a new board member for Baki within the last year. Really wonderful man. So I had a lot of people investing in my life. My personal journey in leadership, along with those people who invested in me, I started getting opportunities. I was a youth group student leader, and that started giving me some opportunity to see what does it look like to serve others. I had mentioned I was a middle school Young Life leader, and so again, I got to figure out what it looked like to walk with some middle school kids when I was in high school. When I first went to college, I got a job coaching a high school snowboarding team. And so that was a really wonderful experience. And it really, these kids were only a few years younger than me. And so I had to quickly figure out what does it look like to, teach and coach these guys, but also, they're going to do what they want to do ultimately. So how do I model for them? Resident assistant. So I worked in the dorms, and again, that put me in a position of leadership. And I really, during that time, I remember a pastor who had gotten into a lot of trouble when he was in college said, just treat people with grace. And so I really had to wrestle through what does it look like to lead people and care for people as they're away from home for the first time. I was a student leader for Campus Crusade for Christ. I was a volunteer intern for my church. I'll get into that a little bit more. After I graduated college and when I was in seminary, I was a shift supervisor at a coffee shop. So that gave me, again, some more leadership responsibilities. I became a Young Life leader in the area I was doing ministry in. So mentoring kids, house manager for a residential treatment facility. So it was a 15-bed facility for people with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder. Was thrown into that situation, way out of my league, no experience. But opportunity to serve those people who were hurting, and also had a staff that I was getting to work with. I was a pastor for a number of years, which obviously led towards lots of opportunities to lead, but lots of opportunities towards failure also. And currently I'm the manager director of We Create Peace Work Solutions. And I forgot to put also Life Solutions. So it's 2 different companies. So hard times. Something I forgot to put in there, I was in a leadership development program right out of college. And it's funny they called it that because I didn't learn anything about leadership. I was for a large printing company, and they put me in different areas of the company to learn kind of all the different roles and responsibilities. But no one ever mentored me in what it looked like to lead people, what it looked like to care for employees, or really even what it looked like to manage people well. And so that didn't last a very long time. I actually ended up getting fired from that job, and getting fired from that job, one of the managers there, who wasn't a Christian, said, "Andrew, you need to be in ministry." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So that actually kind of led me into going to seminary. It was one of the things. There was other things too. I was kind of fighting it for a while, but I moved back to Portland, started seminary, and I got an internship. But the challenge I faced there is the pastor who supervised me, he didn't take time to know me or my strengths. He wanted me to live up to his values without meeting me where I was at. So that was a really painful experience for about 4 or 5 years, where I constantly felt like I was failing because I wasn't good enough. And then when I was succeeding, I wasn't being true to myself because I was only trying to fit his mold. And that was really challenging. A lot of scars from that, but I learned a lot also. When I was the house manager for the house with people with mental illness, again, just a very challenging situation with not a lot of experience. So that was tough, but also look back and go, okay, I learned a lot about myself in that process, and I didn't lead very well there. And then my pastorate at the table, which was the church I was a pastor at, just learned a lot there. I was a co-pastor with somebody else, and that brought its own challenges. Just how do you lead with somebody else, especially in a traditional hierarchical setting? My tendency is to go towards things like servant leadership. His tendency was to go towards a more hierarchical, traditional focus. And so that I think I saw a lot of what I didn't want to be as a pastor, and I think I learned a lot about the nature and purpose of the church during that time. Seeing the church as a caravan of people journeying together instead of a commissary. I didn't want to be a pastor where I just weekly had people come and hear my sermon and my music and then leave. I wanted life and community with people. I wanted to understand and know people's values, understand and know people's skills and strengths and intricacies. And I didn't really get to do that like I wanted to. God's leading. So when I was a junior in college and my university, I heard God's voice telling me I was called to be a shepherd. At first, I didn't want to do that because I thought I just had all these kind of stereotypes of what it meant to be a pastor. No one in my family was, so I just was like, okay, God. But eventually, He led me in that direction. Now, what I would say is that whether I'm paid for it or not, I'm a shepherd because that's who God's created me to be. So I get to go and serve and care for people, whether it's in my job here or in my church or in my neighborhood. That's more of an identity piece that I get to live out of. When I lost my job, I mentioned that I had that person tell me, you need to be a pastor. That spoke to me that God was trying to direct my path. Not that I wasn't allowed to be in business, not that I had to be in traditional vocational ministry only, but it was that I needed to be pursuing the things He was putting in front of me and not running away from them. Not getting jobs I wanted so I could get the job I needed. So there was different times that I pursued things to get jobs that it really, that didn't work out. But God led me ultimately to where I'm at, where I've had a boss for the last over 5 years who's invested in me, who served me well, who's taught me what it looks like to care for people and walk with them in unique ways that aren't traditional for business. So my natural gifts, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Enneagram, but I'm a type 6, which is the loyalist. So it's a personality type assessment, but it's has roots going back a few thousand years, and very good if you haven't experienced it. I'd recommend looking into it. But so I am very loyal. That is something about me that I would say is a natural gift. With that, I believe I'm courageous, meaning I'm able to have faith in challenging situations. I can also be fearful too on the flip side of that, so I have to balance that. But faithfulness, I am highly strategic and a good judge of character. I have ability to see others as individuals and see their strengths. So I kind of talked about that earlier growing up, how I did. I love getting to know people. I have a deep desire to know people and know things. So often on my strength finders, if you've ever taken that, I've gotten input, but I've also gotten ones that are highly related towards relationship and seeing people as individuals. And so I think how that fits together is I love learning about just so many interesting, nuances and things in life. Tons of hobbies that, I tend to be maybe not a jack of all trades, master of none. I tend to get really hyper focused into things so I can learn a lot about it, but I always want to use it to connect with people. I love connecting with people. I love learning about people. And I think that really plays into my gifts in servant leadership, to really try to know people as individuals and know what their skill sets are and empower them to utilize those things. And then empathy. I think with that, trying to understand who people are and where they're coming from, you have to practice empathy in order to really do that, to try to understand what are they really going through, what are they really experiencing. And I think that's something I've thrown into my job in the last 5 years. Experience deficits, so competence. So over the last 5 years, I've worked for We Create Peace, and I have been thrown into new situations, new divisions, projects, and they've all left me needing to kind of, trial by fire, drink from the fire hose and learn quickly. But when I do not feel like an expert in a field, I don't like being responsible for it. Although I end up, being a leader, or getting thrown into leadership positions, it's really challenging for me. So in the last 6 months, I took over our fiduciary division, doing guardianships and conservatorships. And I've come against a lot of these challenges of, I'm not an expert yet, so how can I lead others? So that's something that I'm just wrestling with. I know that I can lead others even without the experience, because I can tap into their experience and we can be a team, but it is hard. Credibility also, if I'm inexperienced in an area I am working in, I struggle to engage. Other challenges, so active listening. While I care deeply for people, I struggle to be an active listener. I'm working on this by trying to remind myself in conversations to listen instead of thinking about what I want to say next. I have ADHD that wasn't diagnosed until about 5 years ago. So I've been learning a lot about just how to work with that and how to live with that, especially when I'm stressed and those symptoms come out more. But I'm definitely seeing good growth in that area. But being an active listener, I know is just a key element of knowing people and really truly listening to people's ideas. Follow through, I struggle to complete what I start. Again, I think this can be related to ADHD, but it also can be, I continue to be a perfectionist, but that leaves people not being able to depend on me. So I'm working on that by, I'm using software to track and triage my responsibilities. So, keeping me accountable to others and my team and myself with what do I need to do and what's in front of me, so I can actually be reliable for people that I'm serving. Fear. So, if I'm not conscientious, I can be driven by fear, which changes the way I treat people. So I've been really working on being led, not by fear, but by faith and courage. Growth and development plans. So accountability, like I talked about, that's been just, I think, a key piece that I'm working towards, is being accountable to the people I work with, the people who report into me, and the people that I serve also, because I work in a service field where we're taking care of people who essentially can't care for themselves. Working with transparency is something that I've been really trying to focus on. I think sometimes it scares me to be transparent because just my life feels compressed sometimes. So I'm really trying to work on being accountable and transparent, staying focused on the real purpose of my work. So not making money, but instead being a blessing to others. When I'm reminded to do that, it changes how I work and changes how I serve people. Weekly meetings with Dr. Kurt Risley. So my boss, I meet with him weekly, and that really helps me stay focused, accountable, transparent. We've established that kind of relationship, but I find that when he's traveling a lot and we're not talking a lot, that's where I tend to get trapped with not being as transparent, accountable and things, and I can derail, and it can change the way I lead because I'm so focused on maybe what I have on my own plate that I don't lead well for others. So teaching, delegating, and empowering is something I'm really trying to work on. Giving up control, and then keeping my vision or my mission, vision, and values in front of me. So it's something else, and I'll kind of actually cover those in a few minutes of the ones we just established as a company, but I fully agree with them to be my own. Gaps, challenges to servant leadership. So desire for control and trust. So servant leadership can leave you more vulnerable to others' actions and decisions. So learning to let go of control to empower others to work and participate requires trust. Especially, I think where that's really hard is because we're serving vulnerable populations. We help people with disabilities find work and keep work, and then we also are guardians and conservators for people who have been deemed by the courts to not be able to care for themselves physically, mentally, financially. And so that's hard sometimes to put trust into other employees' hands when it's, these people's lives, their well-being is on the line. So I'm really trying to learn what that looks like, but that is a challenge we face in our work. And I also just can be a control freak. That's just something I've had to come to terms with and try to deal with. My wife has shown me that. Accountability and visibility. So while I love the tenets of servant leadership, it also requires me to be even more accountable for how I spend my time. Giving up this kind of autonomy feels scary in a compressed life. So just with a lot going on, sometimes being more accountable to others can also feel scary. Competence, learning my field as I lead work. I talked about that a little bit already, so I won't cover that too much. Nature of work, I just talked about that too. So, so I will cover. We just came up with a new vision and values and mission for a company, and they are my vision and values. I have adopted them as my own. We got together as a leadership and really delved through and discussed who are we and what do we believe. And so my vision in life and in work is to create peace in people, places, and systems. So the name of our company is We Create Peace. And so this needs to be front and center of who we are and what we do. So our values, we are created to work, which means I want to empower the people that are working for our company to work well and to work out of their strengths and to be not just worker bees, but to actually see themselves as valued members of the team. Joy is experienced in working and sharing our value with community. So I think I just touched on that a little bit, but really making sure that there's community in our work. We're utilizing each other's gifts and we're journeying together. Integrity is being one person all the time, accountable for our responsibilities. So that's something I'm really trying to grow in, but I do believe in that when I came to Christ, I have a new identity, and that new identity transcends to all areas of my life, including my work, my marriage, my friendships, everything. Consistent growth and learning through words, actions, and circumstances, including both success and failure, is vital. So just learning that, allowing myself to fail, and also with that, allowing others to fail. That's just part of life. Helping them through that process, walking with them, sitting with them in it, that's important. Justice promotes peace, and the ultimate just act is unconditional love. That, I believe, gets to drive me in how I serve others, whether they be my clients or the people I work with. So those are the values. And I think what I want to try to do is tie in some of these into my paper to talk about the different tenets of servant leadership and how they are expressed through these. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew. I'm going to allow your colleagues to ask any questions or make any comment on your presentation.
I'll ask one, Andrew. As a fellow control freak, I was interested in your approach to managing that, navigating that going forward. And one of the things you said was accountability. Can you drill down on what kind of accountability structure you're thinking of?
So I think one of the things that in our work is there's a lot of autonomy. So we're out working with clients a lot of the times. We each have our own clients. And so it's really easy to, I think, not be accountable in what you're doing or how you're spending your time. So some of the things that we've started doing is doing weekly staff meetings where one of the things we all do is just to get to walk through and share what are we doing with each client. So one, we don't feel alone because it can be discouraging and hard, but also so we can share with one another, excuse me, so we can, I think that helps us stay motivated. So I think accountability isn't just, am I doing a good thing for this person, but I think it can also be, am I doing the right thing for this person? Am I am I feeling lost or discouraged? I need other people to weigh into that. So accountability is just helpful for me that way. I can also just be a time waster. So if other people, I have transparency and accountability, it's people knowing what I'm doing, how I'm spending my time. Am I choosing to come to the office and work around other people, or am I choosing to go to a coffee shop and work by myself? Things along those lines. So choosing community to me is also choosing accountability. And also then being able to, even just in meetings, okay, I say I'm going to do this. Let's write this down in a memorandum so I can come back to it and say, yes, I did it.
Yeah. I'll yield after this. I was very curious to know the software you're using for the triage and thing. I would be interested in learning from
Yeah. Yeah, it's called Asana, ASANA. And I use the free version of it. There is a paid version for organizations that you can use, but we're small enough. We just use a free version of it. It works really well for
that was the question I actually wanted to ask, as well. Say that again. AS what?
ASANA. One of the nice things about it is you can invite different people to your list. So it's not just a to-do list, but it is really like you have a project and then you can have to-dos and tasks in it. You comment on it. And so like my organization can see into the projects I'm working on. My office manager can see it. My owner can see it. Other people working on the projects. And so it allows for, especially with a lot of autonomy in our work, it allows for people to see into where are we at with completing stuff, and also what have we done, what roadblocks are we hitting, what help do I need. So that's been really nice.
So it kind of overlaps into the accountability part, huh?
It does, yeah. And so it's not just like a to-do list, like a wonder list kind of app, but it's more of a project management type of software, in my opinion, but creates good lines for collaboration.
I kind of get interested because of the training I'm doing now. We use one that is called Trello.
Okay.
Yeah, Trello does like the same thing, invite a lot of people to the project and they make comments and track what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's been very helpful for me, but it's the key to it is using it. So I have to put everything into it, because if I don't, then my problem is I can get disorganized, and I have things written on a notepad, and I have things written on a notepad on my computer, and then I have things in Asana, and it's like, no, I got to put everything in there no matter what. Yeah. And then I actually follow it, and other people do too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And the others, Bill, we invite you to make your presentation.
Okay, share screen. Okay, so I'll try to get this in the 10 minutes. I'm older than the rest of you, so I had more to squeeze in, I think.
Okay. Sorry, Bill. I hope we can stay beyond the hour. Can we?
I can.
Stay beyond the hour? Okay, thank you. Okay, Bill. So please don't rush it. It's rich, and I'm really learning from you.
Well, I was also a firstborn. That's why I asked Sagan about that. I didn't think of that, to put in my presentation. I really just didn't have a lot of things up until 16 that, I mean, I lived on a farm. I was by myself a lot. My sister's 5 years younger. So, we never even went to the same school together. But when I was 16, I started taking Taekwondo, and I went through the rank pretty quickly. Red belt is just before black belt, and my instructor asked me to be an assistant instructor, which not only did a lot of the classes, but we would go to schools and things and do demonstrations together. So that was kind of my first kind of leadership kind of role, I guess. But I did have a music gift. I started playing as early as I can remember. When I was in the first grade, my parents bought me a piano, and they still have it, and it was all of my growing up years where I would write songs and sing. So in the church, I was a worship leader early on, had a natural gift for harmonies, and was able to direct and teach other people various harmony parts. Also orchestrating and arranging. In my head, I can hear all of the parts, all the instruments, how they're supposed to go, and so I was able to do a little bit of that. By 17, I was an assistant youth pastor and began itinerant preaching. And that's probably I shouldn't have. I had no seminary training, just 17 years of being in the church. But I was in the South, and it was a long time ago, and there was a calling on my life. And so I jumped out there, and what I did do is travel throughout the state, and there was a garnering of influence that would later come into play in terms of serving and leading. At 18, I took a job needing to be bivocational and not travel quite as much on the weekends. Celotex Corporation makes sheathing or insulation you'll see on the side of the houses with foil. It's got a foam kind of thing in the middle, polyisocyanurate to be exact. But I started as a laborer, the bottom of the rung, sweeping floors, stacking the insulation, that kind of stuff. And so I went to my foreman and I said, you know, everybody in this plant's going to need time off. They're going to need vacations. They're going to have sick leave. Why don't you train me on these positions to fill in when they're gone? Ooh. And interestingly, the foreman said, okay, nobody's ever asked. So I learned every position in the plant. So within 2 years, I was the plant foreman, and my foreman became the plant superintendent over 3 shifts. And so in that position, I had some interesting things. My supervisor was horrible, literally threw tape measures at me, scissors at me. This is while I'm foreman. If the plant would break down, money stops. And so he was irate. He had a horrible anger issue. I had to learn to work with that. I learned how not to lead people. We also had a union, so I was caught between management and union. The union were the actual people making the product, and management wanted more bricks with less straw. And it was quite an interesting training time for me. Union employees can say, you know, we're leaving as soon as the whistle blows, and yet my supervisor would be saying, we need them to stay over. We got to finish these truckloads. You know, we'd do 20 trucks a day, and if it was broken down, then you're behind, and trucks are waiting, and you know all of that. So I remember using my influence, which was, by the way, a challenge, because if you're one of them and then you become the foreman, there's automatically an immediate adversarial situation that takes place. It's kind of like the crabs, you know, if one's getting out of the bucket, the others want to pull them down. But somehow I managed to keep my influence pretty well with them. I remember going out and buying bread and lunch meat and stuff and making their lunch while they're working on the line, just serving them to keep them there. You know, maybe it was bribery, but I don't know. I considered it serving. I really needed them to stay. That morphed into me bringing a barbecue grill and making burgers once a week, and just trying to keep the peace and everybody working and being productive. That was Monday through Friday, and then on the weekends I'd still travel and speak. That lasted till about 20, when I got a full-time job. Well, I mean, not a full-time job, a different job, a steady job as a youth and music pastor. But I was still foreman at Celotex, that kept me from traveling on the weekends, a little bit more stable. I got married when I was 20, so that was part of that decision making. my wife and I served together, and our youth group grew from 3 to 120 kids in 2 years. We recruited and trained 10 married couples, total of 20 leaders to help us lead, but also to host small groups of 10 students per couple, because 120, you can't reach them all by yourself. So that was a real leadership intense period of my life. And at 22, we took a position in another town, assistant pastor. Was quite a bit different schedule. I spoke every Sunday night and every Wednesday night, led all the volunteer ministries, training the leaders, recruiting and training the leaders, and serving them. And still worship leader and band leader. The job was growing, but it was full time. Since 27, I've been the senior pastor of 4 different churches in 4 different cities, all in California. I served as divisional superintendent in my denomination for churches in 3 counties, California. I did that for 8 years. I have since served on our denomination's national board of directors for 7 years. The first year just as a director, second year as vice chair, and then the next 5 years as chairman throughout my term on the board. I resigned the board as I became a district supervisor because of conflict of interest. You can't do both. And this is a full-time job. I had to also give up my pastorate. But I now pastor 170 pastors of 170 churches in California, Nevada, and Utah, and they are my congregation. I have a staff of 6 administrators and 12 field superintendents. That's what I was. I was one of those for 8 years. And then leading the 170 pastors. I seek to serve them. I did an organizational assessment, which was one of my classes in this program. And I used that to assess the district that I supervise, and brought my core leaders together at different levels, almost like town hall meetings, just, what's working, what's not working, how can we improve the service of our pastors and that kind of thing. That was a great experiment for me. It just so happened that I was taking that class when I got this position. So that was, to me, a godsend, and we're still in the process of implementing the things that that my leaders came up with in those meetings. Going forward, my plan is to finish the DLT program, continue to read and learn about servant leadership. There's more books than I realized on this topic. I'm just now taking this class. Wish I'd have taken it years ago. I also intend to intentionally surround myself with other servant leaders. You kind of become like who you hang around, and it's not natural for me, even though I've had some moments in my history of seeking to serve with, I think, a pure motive. It's still work for me. I've not seen it modeled coming up, so I've kind of gone against the grain. And then focus practicing servant leadership within my sphere. That's me working on me, and taking it from the realm of philosophy or just academia to actual practice in my life. And my battery's about to die, so I'll hurry. I think the next slide is my personal mission statement is to utilize my education, experience, unique talents, natural abilities, and spiritual gifts to serve other people by helping them to discover their unique talents, natural abilities, and spiritual gifts so they can ultimately fulfill God's calling on their lives and experience fulfillment as well as fruitfulness. That's what I've tried to do my whole life. I've not put it into words until recently, but what life will look like if I'm successful is other people will be not just doing work of the kingdom, but fulfilled in it because they're in the right places for the right reasons at the right time. And if I can be a tool towards that end, then I feel like, my life will have mattered when it's all said and done. So, and that's it. I'm going to stop sharing and go get my charger real quick. So if you have questions, I'll still be able to hear you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Bill. I have to say, and I need to give you time to ask Bill questions so when he comes back, but I've really been blessed by your presentations. I've learned a lot about you, and there's some things I see that we share in common. When Bill comes back, I'll pull them together.
I'm here.
Yeah, you can. Okay. Yes. What stands out for me, and I think it would be interesting to look at the research on this. Bill, I'm going to give them a chance to ask you questions, but I'm just pulling together what I see coming through, some themes, and that I share with you. It was interesting when Sigon identified being a firstborn as the beginning of his journey in leadership. I hadn't thought of that, but I could identify with that. I'm the firstborn for my parents. There are 5 of us. But what was interesting about that, and my leadership tendency started from within the home. My parents, like Sigon's parents, always instilled in me that as the eldest, I had to set the example, and they had very high expectation for me, and I just naturally fell into that. But my sister after me, who is about 11 months younger than me, she was really the leader, because I am quiet. I tend to be introvert and what they would have described as bookish. My sister after me is outgoing, and she has always been the leader up to today. I always have to remind her, I'm the eldest, but personality. But leadership is not really a function of personality. It's more than personality. So personality-wise, I was not what you would call a natural leader. But in other areas, I certainly have been. So thank you, Sigon, for identifying that, because I did not think of that firstborn. But definitely in my own life, I could see where that's where the mark started. I was always the leader. That was clear in terms of what my parents expected me to be. And it's interesting, within our family, I'm identified as the leader. My nieces and nephews, they are advised to look up, Auntie Pam, that's the one you look to, etc. So that has been within the family. The other thing that stands out for me, and I'm excited about that, because so much of it is documented in the research. All of us, and I'm sure Brian probably can identify with this too, we got our leadership start in the church in terms of our responsibilities in the church. And the church has done an excellent job that sometimes society has not recognized in training people to serve and to be leaders. That is documented over and over again. And I'm excited about that, because I too was involved in, you talk about Young Life. I identify with the youth group that Sigon talked about. It was InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which is a global youth group on campuses, university and college campuses. But in the Caribbean, from where I come, it's also in schools, in primary schools, high schools, etc. And one of the stated purpose of this Christian student movement is to train leaders. Yes. I worked within it, so I know what that is. It's an intentional stated purpose to train Christian leaders. Yes. And that is important. And I say that because all of us are at the stage now where we are mentoring and training others. And one of the things we never want to do is to ignore the young as potential leaders. Because so many leaders, when you ask them to tell their stories, it goes way back into their youth. So we have to remember that as we look forward to invest in young people in terms of training for leadership. Your stories exemplify that. You talked about challenges, and we can all talk about challenges and how challenges feed and inspire us to become better persons and better leaders. That's certainly, but I hear throughout your presentations that theme of service, which is putting people first, putting others first, regardless of whether or not it benefits self. And I think we can all ascribe that to the Christian faith position that we are a part of. So I thank you for that. Questions for Bill?
All right, I will. Okay, Andrew, can you? Okay. I actually interested in your experience, and then two things or two questions, or maybe they may be together. But number one that is crucial for me is the issue of discipline. You know, I mentioned in my presentation about empathy and finding it difficult, you know, to discipline. I can remember vividly, there was the time I was in Mount Carmel Christian School, I was a school administrator. Our security guard was very rude. I think was very rude to one of the parents of the children in the school. And I was trying to correct him and tell him that's wrong. And he was, you know, flagrantly, you know, rude. So I spoke with the my director then that, okay, this is very wrong. So the director said I should give him a query, and I mean no suspension, and then we'll decide what to do with him. So I gave him the suspension, but the day after I was feeling very bad for him. I had to be talking to to the director. So what should we do? This is a family man. We can't just it's a little bit difficult for me. But I know you work in a not complex, but a little bit detailed organization. How do you undo that? And then you still show empathy as one of the characteristics of a servant leader. That's number one. Number two is that I see, you know, it's Assemblies of God, right?
I've been Foursquare.
Foursquare, yes. Foursquare. How do you manage? I know we've discussed about hierarchy and then servant leadership. How do you manage the two? The concept of hierarchy, because I know that there is some form of hierarchical structure with Foursquare. How do you manage that with the concept of servant leadership?
Well, if I can start with the second question.
Okay.
I think hierarchy in and of itself, in my opinion, the structure is not antithetical to servant leadership. It depends on the leader. Because if you are at the top of the hierarchy, then you can choose to exercise servant leadership and listen to the people that's in the downline, if you will, and according to the structure. It's a dangerous structure, because it can also have a dictator almost. There are safeguards within our organization. The board is one of them. The president can't just make decisions. I'm a supervisor that's under the covering. I have 10 colleagues across the nation, and there's 11 regions. And we are all under a general supervisor who submits not only to the president, but to the board. So there's still, the hierarchy can be here's how I see it, okay? It's like this. If you're under this sphere, okay, you can see that as oppression, depending on the leader, or you can see it as a covering that's keeping all of the darts from hitting you. And so it really depends on the character, the integrity of the leader. Any structure can be abused. So it's really about the heart. My heart is to cover my pastors, to resource them. I use my influence and my authority to serve them I pay for their conferences for them. I resource them with education, with books. I'm using my budget to help fund their dreams. So it just really depends on the leader. But the hierarchy to me is it's just boxes on a sheet of paper with lines between them. It's really the heart of the people that are in it that makes the difference. So the first question about discipline is always a hard one. And it's not easy to compare Celotex, which was a union shop, which you have particular, clear cut, this is what happens if you do that, from pastoring a church or leading a district. So my thoughts on discipline is, if it's ever easy, you should resign. It should never be easy for you. It should never cause you, it should always cause you to lose a little bit of sleep, and it should be something you really pray about and even, get input on. Just because I have the authority to discipline, I certainly don't just make quick decisions. I gather people around me that I trust, certainly my colleagues in this case, and say, have you ever experienced this? What did you do? How did you do it? What was the outcome? How do you restore people? We don't use the word discipline. We use the word restoration. Something that shouldn't have been done. Is there anything that we can do to address what caused it? How can we get to what's really the issue and resolve it at that level? Because the action is just the acting out of something that's broken on the inside. And so we go to the soul first, but we do have to deal with issues. I just had a pastor who just kissed a lady that he works with. He's bivocational. I have to immediately set him down. But I'm also paying $5,000 for him and his wife to go to Colorado to a Christian counseling and retreat center, paying their airfare, their hotels. I have to set him down, but I want to see him stand back up. And so we don't call it discipline. This is your restoration process. You won't be in the pulpit Sunday, but here's what we're going to do. And we move forward that way. So I hope that helps. It's a case-by-case thing.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question for Bill?
I just, appreciated hearing your journey. I resonated. I didn't share this in mine, but when I was fresh out of high school, I had a job working in a warehouse and had a supervisor who would, verbally abuse me every morning when I got there every day, and I was doing a great job. He was just an angry person. And so, hearing kind of the journey we all go through of the ups and downs, in my story, I think growing up, I had all these people outside of workplaces who were investing in me, but in work, I never had good leadership experience. I always had bad situations. So, unfortunately, that's changed. And fortunately, that has changed now. But, it is interesting how that shapes us, and even to hear about how you're dealing with situations currently, like you just shared about, what an awesome, polarization of what you experienced and how someone treated you to how you're getting to treat people who are, going through it. So I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. This has been quite informative, and I would like to put it together in terms of our focus on servant leadership. We looked at servant leadership, character, and ethics. I must confess that perhaps I needed to do more to focus on those last two, but inherent in the theme of servant leadership are the issues of both character and ethics. Because if you're going to put people first, then it speaks to the issue of your personal character as you seek to facilitate and develop character in others. And certainly from your stories, from from our stories, we can see the many ethical challenges that servant leadership presents to us. Bill just gave us one in terms of working with the pastor in his organization. So there is a link, albeit I would say I feel like I did not do as much as I would have liked to do in terms of exploring that link. But there's certainly an inherent link in servant leadership, character, and ethics. I want to close and remind us about servant leadership as a theory. Undoubtedly, we have many stories, and we are ourselves stories, and we've experienced in different ways servant leadership modeled for us by people whom we have met along the way, both professionally and in our churches and on the job, etc. But the issue of servant leadership as a theory is still being worked out, in the sense that the one of the characteristics of a theory is that we should be able to measure it, so that it's not sufficient for us to, and not that these are not important, it's not sufficient for us to rest on just the anecdotes, the stories of servant leadership. We need to be able to define servant leadership theoretically, so we can measure it, so we could do research on it to validate that which we're talking about. And at the beginning of the course, I did mention to you the 3 streams of research on servant leadership. Servant leadership as a concept, the conceptual stream, how it is represented. Servant leadership as a measurement. How do you measure, how do you evaluate servant leadership? And then servant leadership as a model, the framework that describes and represents servant leadership. One of the writers commented on what he calls the absence or the paucity of empirical studies that explore servant leadership theory in a given organizational setting. So for those of you going forward, if you do not yet have a dissertation topic, you might want to think of exploring, researching servant leadership within the organization that you're a part of. Can you measure that? Because that is how we test theory. First of all, we state what our theory is, and then we test it with research. So there needs to be more research on servant leadership in terms of organizations. How do organizations exemplify servant leadership? How do they model servant leadership? In our stories, we've talked about being on the job, working with people who did not necessarily encourage or model or facilitate servant leadership, but our own experience, both on the job and outside of the job, has focused us towards a sense of servant leadership, serving so that we could empower others. So the other thing is that the theory is still underdefined, with various authors grappling with various definitions of servant leadership. But I want to remind us that of the several characteristics of servant leaders. Vision, and you've talked about that in your stories, honesty, integrity, trust, service, modeling, pioneering, appreciation of others, and empowerment. All of these are important characteristics of servant leadership, of the servant leader. And when we think of the servant leader, we don't just think of one characteristic. We think of the servant leader as embodying all of these characteristics. And that is important. And then in closing, I want to take us back to our faith, the Christian faith position. Now, what for me has been very interesting after reading the work of Greenleaf, which I first did many years ago, was to see how industry and commerce and business had embraced this concept. That for me was quite fascinating, because my understanding of servant leadership has been within the context of my Christian faith. And Jesus admonished that those of us who would like to lead must begin by being willing to serve others. That is Jesus's definition, a very simple definition of who is the Christian leader. The Christian leader is servant first, but not just servant first, servant always. That, in a nutshell, is what defines Christian leadership. Unfortunately, we are more prone to giving lip service to that than to actually working it out in terms of how we do leadership in the context of the church. So within the church, I think there is need for us to measure for, study servant leadership. Now, and I say that recognizing that people would look askance of us, because they would say, but that's who we are. But no, we have to see, are we really being servant leaders as Jesus has taught us to be? And so we can't just assume, and I think that is our biggest challenge within the Christian faith. We assume that leaders, that Christian leaders are servants. We can testify that that is not an accurate assumption. So the question then is, what do we as leaders in our given context, what do we do to not only embody servant leadership, but encourage our respective organizations to move towards being truly servant organizations? I think that is one of the biggest challenges we face in the context of our Christian faith. The irony of it is that business and industry, they are deliberately working towards being the serving organization, as our writer talked about. But are we doing that? Are we being deliberate in being the servant organization? We who are the people of God, we who are the church. So I challenge us in our various contexts to become more intentional in not only modeling, because I'm convinced that we're all doing that in terms of our modeling of servant leadership, but to go beyond the modeling and to challenge our organizations as Christian organizations to be service oriented, meaning we are putting people first. We are putting empowerment of people first, before ourselves, before whatever goals and visions and mission statements that we have. People's development is embodied in that, central to our focus. So that's where I'd like to leave us. It's been a pleasure having you in the class, and there's so much that you have to share, and I've learned a lot from having you be in this class. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just say, Dr. Henry, I've learned so much from this class. I'm still learning. One of the things that what you just said about is not just leader first, but leader always, that will stick with me forever, because it's been apparent in people's lives, maybe even mine in some places, where we're we're serving until we get a leadership role, and then we forget that we're supposed to still. Mm-hmm. That really stuck out to me. And then also, just a sidebar, I've given Greenleaf's book to my pastors. So not only am I trying to share what I'm learning with them, but that creates an accountability for me, because
Yes.
when they see that I'm trying to get them to be a servant leader, they're definitely going to look back at me like, okay,
Yes.
are you living that as well? So
Mhm.
I've really gained a lot that will continue to manifest, dividends for me, and hopefully the people I lead from this class. And I just want to thank you for everything, and my fellow students.
You're very welcome. Anybody else?
Yes,
Go ahead, sing on.
thank you very much. I mean, it's been 9 weeks of reflection and looking back, and then seeing what I've taught to have been, servant leadership, and what has not been, in my personal experience,
Mm-hmm.
and then sharing experiences, with Bill, Andrew, and Brian, has really brought out a lot. And then, you sharing freely your own experience with others as well is really putting me in certain track of, what I need to do more appropriately going forward. Thank you very much. Thank you,
You're very
everyone.
welcome. I'm going to ask Bill to close our session in prayer. But before we do that,
Hey, Dr. Henry.
sure. Yes, Brian.
Hey, yeah, I've been listening in. I just really couldn't say anything. I just walked out of the meeting. I am so sorry. I apologize. What I wanted to do was, number one, I apologize that I can't, do my presentation. I'm still at work, but I can send it to you, I guess, Dr. Henry, to share.
Yes, definitely. Okay. In fact, I'm going to ask each of you to send your presentation, and then I'm going to put it in, I'm sorry, into the info section. I'm sorry, so that you can look at each other's presentation. Thank you, Brian.
Okay. The second question was concerning the project. Yes. I've done some revisions, so I wanted to send that to you as well as soon as I get home.
Okay, yes, I appreciate that. You have up to the end of the course to submit all the other assignments, including the project. But if you submit it,
okay.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for reminding me. I wanted to speak.
Now I was under the impression that each of us needed that presentation as part of our final project.
Say that again?
I thought each of us needed the group project as part of our final paper and project.
The group project is separate, but I am looking at it as the entire group, not just one person. So that's why I've taken time to look at it and give you feedback, so that when you get in the final copy, I am receiving it from the group, not just one person, because I expected that you all participated in it. So I understand that. So when whatever grade you get, it will be, each of you will get the same grade. That's how that will be graded. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask Bill to lead us in our closing prayer.
Okay, can I ask you one question first?
Sure.
I noticed on my grades that I don't have a grade for week 2 discussion.
For week 2?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'll have to go back and look at that.
Well, my question is, there's a place to drag and drop it, but it's also on the discussion board. I didn't know if I was supposed to cut and paste from discussion and send it separately as well.
No, I usually just go through the discussion threads and grade it. So I'll definitely go through and look at that.
I just want to make sure I have everything.
Sure, definitely, I'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good.
All right. Well, I'll pray. Lord, we thank you for these weeks together. I thank you for our professor, Dr. Henry. I thank you, Lord, that she's leading us and serving us well and learning how to serve and lead others. And thank you for each of my fellow students. I pray blessings on their lives, and you would continue to grow us and develop us into your image, which is the great goal, Lord, of our Father in heaven. And please continue that work in us by your Spirit and by the encounters and the education that we receive. We thank you that you're still working on us all. And so for that, we give you praise and glory. Thank you in Jesus' name.
Amen. Blessings on you all.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the completion of the course, and I hope to be in touch with you again.
Thank you.
Right.
Goodbye.
Thank you.